She married him to bear his heir, and this is where the story begins. Pelias, the Grand Duke of the far north of the empire. And here was a girl sitting by the window, telling and saying, "I got married here today, and the owner of this place is the Grand Duke Baras Pelias, a war hero respected by everyone, and at the same time, he is the killer who is feared by everyone, and he buried his father, who died in battle with his own hands at the age of 9. And beside his father's killer, for 2 years, he pretended to be a war orphan and hosted the horse groom. And finally, when Baras gained the man's trust, he succeeded in taking revenge. And he was criticized for being dishonorable, but he didn't care. And Baras lived on the battlefield for 16 years. He also led all the empire's wars to victory, but he had one problem. That when the full moon comes, he commits a brutal massacre, without giving any consideration to friend or foe. And so Baras earned 2 names, war hero and killer. And I am Selene Pelias. I married that killer man today, and with princesses and nobles who would queue up to marry him if he sent them a marriage proposal. Why did he choose Selene, who has no family and all she owns is her name? Is it because of her unparalleled beauty? And here he pulled her tightly towards him and looked at her in fear so much that she was about to cry from fear. Or is it love at first sight? No, this killer cannot feel that. Even if I lost contact with Baras suddenly, this is what he wants, a woman who doesn't ask even if he doesn't come home. Because today, after the first night, Baras plans to imprison the Duchess in the room for the rest of her life. And here she explains to us how she knew what would happen to her with her saying, "How can I know that?" That's because all of that happened in the novel I was reading. Of all the romantic novels out there, isn't that too much? This is ridiculous. Even my day, when a friend came to her and said to her, "Are you reading a novel again? They say they've started reading the script now." And she's okay. I was going to stop reading it anyway because it wasn't interesting. And the girlfriend, "What kind of novels are they?" And she's, "It's just garbage." And here her friend said, "It seems you don't like this type." And she laughed and said, "So I didn't finish reading it." And here she means the novel that embodied the character of the heroine. So she said in tension, "Of course, even if I read it to the end, maybe it won't help me at all because I won't even be able to get out of my bedroom after today." And here she felt frustrated and said, "And unfortunately, when I came to my senses, the wedding was already over, and I was waiting for Baras in the room." And here she fell on the bed and said, "There's also a snowstorm outside. No money or knowledge of the geography of this place." Then she said in tension, "And on top of all that, the owner of this body is beautiful but very thin." And here she remembered how she was saying, "Even when I didn't have money, I ate seaweed for a week. I was stronger than this body." And here she felt sleepy. She said, "I'm in a big mess. I'm sleepy. And if I don't escape today, I'll be stuck in this prison for life." And suddenly Baras came in and started looking at her, and here Selene noticed his presence. And she got up and said, "Did Baras enter the bedroom?" And here she looked at him and continued saying to herself, "I used to call him the Monster Duke. Is he really scary in reality?" And here he was looking at her while she was saying to herself, "He's huge." And here he said to her, "What are you doing?" And here she said to herself, "He doesn't look very scary, does he?" Then she said to him, "I'm sorry, I was asleep." And in tension she said to him, "I'll get out of here quickly." Here he was looking at her in a frightening way, and she was trying to get up from the bed. She said to herself, "It will be difficult to escape since this man has entered the bedroom." But Baras put the lamp down and said to her, "Go to sleep." And when she tried to object and said to him, But," he said to her, "Sleep." And she did it immediately. Then she said to herself, "Although he looks a bit scary, isn't he handsome enough? He looks like a bear, that he is cute. Why did I almost faint when I read about him in the original novel? I don't know. Since I lay on the bed now feeling sleepy and fell asleep, and here Baras was looking at her in silence, and suddenly he clenched his fist in anger. Then he looked at her with a frightening look. And in a new morning she woke up and got up, and when she put her hand on the bed, She started saying, I can't feel any warmth at all. Did Paris sleep somewhere else? And she got up and took her ease on the other side, saying, he might be a bit lonely. But aren't we a couple? Why are we sleeping apart? But she didn't know that he was sitting in front of her looking at her. And here, when she noticed him, she looked at him in tension and said, oh my God, there he is. And here he looked at her with his frightening eyes, but she saw him in a different way as she felt amazed and said to herself that he is more handsome in the light. Then she said to him, since you weren't there, I thought you were somewhere else. Okay? And suddenly she was shocked and felt embarrassed and got under the bed. And she felt embarrassed and said to herself, what should I do? I became his wife. I already got married. I became this man's wife. At this time, Baras was also saying to himself, I got married yesterday. Most people get scared when they see me and can't make eye contact with me. Even my subordinates have a bad impression of me, so it's impossible for me to have a normal marriage. However, I married a one-eyed man, nicknamed the War Demon Poor Woman, and here he remembered her look at him as he said, but yesterday, not now. She laughed and said to me, since you weren't there, I thought you were somewhere else. And here he asked himself and said, is she not afraid of me? She sees me as an ordinary man. And here he thought for a while, and then sighed and said, this cannot be possible. Then he got up and looked at her and said to himself, it's useless delusions. And here Celine said to herself when she felt his footstep, I think he went out. And she got up quickly and said, I think he left so I can change my clothes right. Then she went and opened the closet and said, but he is nice and not like what was said about him in the novel. And here she thought and say to herself, could he possibly do this suddenly? Something like that? He wouldn't do it, right? Then she chose a dress, but she didn't know how to wear it. So she looked at him and said, but how do I wear this? I should have read a lot about this novel. After a while, Baras arrived. She was wearing the dress, but it needed to be tied at the back. However, he ignored her. At that moment, she looked at him as he went to the bed and poured blood on it. She fell to the ground in fear, saying to herself, blood. Then she went away, imagining things. And in shock, she said, what? What? Is he going to summon a demon? There was nothing about blood in the novel. Was it a horror novel? Who is the victim? Could it be me? Baras offers his hand to Celine, saying, the floor is cold. Take my hand. Celine takes his hand and says shyly, thank you. Baras offers to help Celine with her clothes, and she says, oh, yes. Celine thinks to herself, it's big and thick. So these are men's hands. He's a bit like a bear, and charming. While Celine is feeling comfortable, Baras looks at her in shock and thinks to himself, wait a minute. She's small and white and she's thin too. If I touch her, I feel like she might break. Baras feels tense and doesn't know what to do. When Celine looks at him, he tightens the ribbon. The maid, Anna, arrives and says, I'll help Her Grace the Duchess prepare. Celine goes to Anna and says, oh, thank you. Celine's thoughts. Baras was looking at me angrily. He was thinking to himself, I feel empty without her. If I could just close this door, she wouldn't escape me like this, would she? While Anna was helping her, Anna told me to prepare a meal for the Archduke, and then she left the room with him. They've both left. I think I can still smell the blood. I need to air out the room. I went to the window and opened it. Suddenly, I felt sad and said to myself, I got through last night safely without any incidents, but I remembered what happened to Celine in the novel. She said, originally, Celine lost consciousness before her first night and was imprisoned. Baras lived in the Grand Duchess's room after announcing his retirement to focus on farming. He paid no attention to the plight of a 20-year-old girl who was so afraid she couldn't even look into his eyes. A real monster. But it didn't happen to me like it did in the original novel. As in the original work, I wasn't imprisoned immediately. There is no hope in a situation like this. Celine's thoughts. My hands are trembling. If I miss my chance today, I may never have another chance to escape. But going out into the snow without any preparation is like going to my death. Baras's actions. He knocks on the door and says, I'm coming in. When he doesn't get a response, he enters the room and finds Celine looking out the window. Baras's thoughts. Doesn't she feel cold? I heard she came from the warm southwest of the country. Baras's actions. He approaches Celine and says, or maybe, do you like the cold weather here? Celine's action. She hears his footsteps and turns to look at him. Baras's thoughts. It's scary to feel so overwhelmed just by making eye contact, but this face looking at me is exactly my type. Baras's actions. He says to Celine, you haven't eaten anything, have you? Aren't you hungry? Baras's thoughts. My guess was right. She's looking at me without fear. While Celine was looking at him, she imagined him as a lion and herself as a rabbit. She said to him, if you're hungry, can I get you some grass? She tried to suppress a laugh and said to herself, I shouldn't laugh. Baras looked at her and thought to himself, was she going to laugh? He remembered something and said, it seems that Celine likes to be asked if she's hungry. If you'll allow me, I'd like to apologize here to Her Grace the Archduke. He remembered how they used to be afraid of him and said, His Grace the Archduke has been on the battlefield since he was young and has never had the opportunity to meet women. Baras's speech. Although you attended some of the victory parties hosted by the imperial family, no woman ever came to talk to His Highness. And if there was any eye contact, they would feel terrified and quickly turn away. Therefore, you were just an object of fear, and His Highness the Archduke never spoke to a woman. Ever. Celine's thoughts. I want to go out. But I suddenly remembered that I shouldn't do that. I said that because I was in a bad mood. What should I do if he imprisons me immediately because of my arrogance? It's impossible that he will let me leave. I don't want to be imprisoned again after I just felt a little bit of freedom. Baras surprised her by offering his hand. She said, yes? And Baras said to her, you need to get up if you want to go out. She followed him, thinking to herself, do I have to wear these things? It's hard to walk in them. But it's nice to take care of my clothes and coordinate them. Celine's thoughts. When Baras turned to look at her, she was shocked and thought to herself, I'm so slow. Is he telling me to walk faster? However, Baras offered her his arm. At this point, she looked at him silently, her mind racing in disbelief. Is he asking me to hold his arm? She thought to herself. No, he can't mean that, right? He's just folding his elbows, I guess. I think I'll just stay still. Baras looked at her in silence, and she thought to herself, I'm so nervous. Suddenly, she remembered the words of his assistant, Yarthain Orgus, who had told him, when a woman is wearing uncomfortable clothing, it is polite to offer her your arm. And here he was angry because he thought she had rejected him. And he remembered the assistant's words when he said to him, therefore, unless you are someone she hates to the point of death, she will not refuse your company. So he grabbed her hand in anger and said to himself, I cannot say that there is any affection between us, but Celine and I are now a couple. And unlike the others, she was not afraid of me. And here I turn to the other side, and he says, what is this nonsense? A woman was brought here for one purpose only, which is to have children. Anyway, I don't know why I treat her like this. All I have to do is lock her up. But suddenly, as Celine was about to fall, Baras turned to her quickly and managed to catch her. And here Celine felt embarrassed as she put her hand on his thigh and started saying to herself, oh my God, his thigh, it's hard like a giant tree. At the same time, Baras was also shocked and started saying to himself, oh my God, her waist, it's so thin, and she's so light she weighs like a rabbit. I must feed her a lot before winter so she fills up, and I must add more furniture to the room, a fireplace and another layer of windows, and I must not let her out. He said this thinking he loved her, and this is because Paris Phileas was a man who lived and died without knowing love. He lived a lonely life, but in the end, he died without realizing he was alone. And as for Celine, in the original story, the imprisoned Celine suffered from Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome means that the person who is being harmed feels sympathy for the person who is harming them. It is said that she slowly fell in love with Baras. But what about Baras? Unfortunately for Baras, Celine was just a woman to have children. This is unfortunate. Then the character who embodied Celine's character said, "But now I think I understand why Celine opened her heart in the original story. When I was about to fall, he suddenly ran towards me with a surprised expression and held me tightly in his arms. At that moment, I touched Paras's massive thigh and chest, and the smell of wood coming from him. That's why she felt embarrassed and said to herself, 'Is his skin made of wood?' I thought it would be hard, but I never expected it to be this hard. Did he spray some perfume before he came to see me? Surely not. In the original story, he was described as a scary monster. But when I met him in person, he was very kind and careful, and his manners were perfect, to be honest. If I keep meeting Baras this way, I think I'll fall in love, won't I? It's definitely not because Baras is the perfect type for me, or because I'm easy." And suddenly Baras gave her his hand and said to her, "If walking is hard enough to make you fall, isn't it better to hold on to me, even if we don't walk at the same speed? Take my hand." And here she stared at him in amazement and then did so, and he took her outside. And here she looked at the meadow and said, "It's really a great place." And she went to see the grass. At this time, Baras looked at her and said to himself, "There is still a lot of time until the weather gets warm, so the view is ugly. What's good about those barren fields and bare branches?" She shows up with such a cheerful face, and here when she looked at him and laughed, his feelings moved, and he felt embarrassed and turned to the other side. He said to himself, "It's worth seeing her like this. Anyway, I don't think she'll look at this again." But she did and said to herself, "Wow, it looks like the real Middle Ages." And here she remembered her past and said, "In the past, when I was in a theater troupe, I used to imagine myself working in Hollywood, but this scene is real now. But if I can't go back to Korea and I have to live locked in my room like the original story, then what's the point of all these sights? And if I can't escape, I wish I could at least capture this person's heart. But how can I, who have never been in love, let alone in a relationship?" And here she gave a sad face, while Baras was looking at her and clenched his fist in anger. He said to himself, "Why are you making such a sad face?" And he went to her and said to himself, "Just a short while ago, she was happy to see the ugly old castle and the abandoned fields." And suddenly he grabbed her arm firmly and looked at her angrily. He said to himself, "Did she suddenly realize that that monster is her husband?" And this indicates his lack of self-confidence, while she was looking at him in amazement, so he couldn't say anything and just said, "It's better to go in now." Then he left quickly. He said to himself, "This is the woman I brought here, so why can't I even yell at her?" But suddenly she stopped him and said, "Excuse me, can you give me your arm, please?" And here Baras was shocked and said to himself, "Oh my God." Then he said in embarrassment to himself, "Yes, there are times when you feel frustrated when you are in a cold place for a long time. In addition, your stamina will run out quickly, so you may collapse from exhaustion on the way." Then here he drew a scene in his imagination where she falls from exhaustion and he carries her and says, "If you are having difficulty, I will carry you." And she looked at him lovingly and said to him, "Thank you, Baras." And here we will go back to reality, and he gives her his arm and says to himself, "At that time, I have to carry her in." A special hug scene. But that didn't happen, and here, he said to himself, "She looked like she was going to collapse at any moment. But she's walking well." And here Celine went to the fireplace and said, "Wow, it's warm." I think Anna lit the fireplace, but Baras didn't give her a word, so she felt nervous and said to herself, "Why aren't you saying anything again?" And Baras just looked at her silently, while Celine said to herself, "I want to say something now to lighten the mood." So she turned to him and said, "Wow, the atmosphere is really peaceful." But Baras said in tension to himself, peace. And here she said to him, I really enjoyed myself today. The scenery was beautiful, too. Let's go for a walk together like this from time to time. At this time, Baras said to himself, she says she's going for another walk and she feels comfortable. Isn't this woman afraid of me? Wait, I was definitely planning to lock her in the room as soon as we got back, but how did it end up like this? And here she was looking at him in surprise at his silence, while he continued and said, yes, it's all because of those eyes. As I look into those eyes, I feel like I'm under that woman's spell, as if he is. And here he took her robe and said to himself, let's not forget the main goal. Then he looked at her and said to himself, all this woman has to do is have a baby. And if so, even today. And suddenly Celine smiled at him, and here he is, stunned as it is. And he said to himself, she must be tired today, so it's best to start tomorrow. Then he covered her up and said to her, first of all, you must sleep well today. And Celine, yes. And she did that, and the next day when she woke up, she found Anna in the room, and here Anna said to her, you're already awake, Your Grace the Grand Duchess. And here Celine said to her, you don't need to greet me like that. And she says to herself, it's kind of to be treated this way by someone older than me. But Anna said to her, everyone will treat you and greet you this way. And here Celine felt embarrassed and was silent for a bit, then said to her, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but I grew up as a common girl and I'm not used to etiquette, and I still don't know how to respond in such situations. I hope you can help me. And here Anna looked at her and said to herself, of course. As I said, it seems you don't know much, but the tone and presence are not bad. In that case, you might soon be suitable. And here she said to her, would you like to have your breakfast first? And after Celine did that, she said to herself, I'm full and I feel warm. What should I do now? And suddenly, in shock, she got up and said to herself, come to think of it, no one told me to leave the room. In the original novel, Celine was imprisoned, but Anna did not do that yet. So she took a robe and continued saying, I need to go out and get some fresh air and the gentle sunlight. People say that one gets depressed when they stay in a closed place for a long time like this. But suddenly she found Anna in front of her, and she said to her, where are you going? And Celine, outside, staying inside, makes me feel depressed. And here she noticed that she brought her lunch. And here Anna said to her, how would you like to have it? And Celine, it might be difficult to take it outside. And here Anna said to herself, did the Grand Duchess want to go outside? I can prepare it again as an outdoor meal, but instead of going out. And here she said to her, there is another table at the end of the corridor. Having lunch there might give you the feeling of an outing. And Celine said, enjoy. Really? Then let's go now. And Anna, I'll get it ready right away. And when Celine went outside and was about to eat, she was saying to herself, but what is the first cutlery that I should use? Outside, if I make a mistake, then Anna will point it out. And here Anna looked at her and said to herself, I haven't decided yet what and how I will teach Her Highness the Grand Duchess. Really, as my master said, and she remembered when Baras said to them, I will bring you a girl. All she has to do is give birth to an heir. And here she said, there is no need to teach her anything if she is only going to live in my inner palace as a woman for the heir. But looking at today and yesterday, this cannot be the case. When I discovered Baras's trick and found animal blood on their bed. And here she said in tension, my lord already knows that I can distinguish between animal blood and human blood. And it means that this animal's blood must have been seen by the maids in the outer castle in order to counter the gossip that will arise due to the lack of consummation of the first night. Did my lord do such a gentle thing? Is this my Grand Duke? Who are we talking about now? Is it possible that my lord has suddenly gone mad? However, it is clear that Her Highness the Grand Duchess had even the slightest effect on the lord's actions. Perhaps only Her Highness the Grand Duchess will be a beacon of hope for the north, which may stop the lord's rampage. And suddenly, Selene called out to her, and she said to her, "Since I'm going out today, is there anything I should know?" And here Anna said in tension to herself, "Leaving the castle. Are you just planning to go for a walk?" And here she said to her, "I will follow you." And she is saying to herself at the same time, she can never be alone. And here the scene changes to Baras, and he says to himself, "My head. I feel like, as if it is frozen, I need a reason to say it while locking her up. And of course, I tried to lock her up without a reason. But that was also." And here in shock, he said, "Doesn't this look like I'm treating her like an object? I brought her here for one reason. I know I sound like a hypocrite, but I still need a reason." And here he remembers her health and says to himself, "I don't want her to act like this." And he went towards the window and said to himself, "What on earth is this?" And here he looked at them, and he says to himself, "What are you two doing now?" And when they left, he said, "Wait a minute. They won't leave the castle, will they?" And here in tension, he said, "Why? Are you trying to escape? Since Anna is with her, this will not happen. What if she tried to escape from Anna in a crowded place?" And here he went quickly and said, "I must follow them immediately." At the same time, Selene was looking in amazement at the fountain in front of her, saying to herself, "What a beautiful fountain. I don't know many historical facts, but the market seems alive and crowded." Here she sat down by the fountain and said to herself, "I feel like I'm on a journey." Then she started thinking and said to herself, "Looking at it, I don't think the main content of the novel will be helpful at all. Unlike the original description, Baras is also very nice." Here she remembered him and said, "Yesterday, too, when Baras said to her, 'Take my hand,' and she did, she felt shy and started saying happily, 'I don't know, I've never been in a relationship before. At this stage, Baras and I, don't we seem like we're in a relationship?' But when she remembered his evil look, she stopped smiling and said, 'Hey, that's right. Let's just not dream anything. True, I can go out and I'm not locked up right now, but his nature hasn't changed yet. Still, I still want to have a relationship with Baras. He's even my favorite type.' Then she looked at Anna and smiled, saying, 'Why are you standing there like that? Come sit next to me.' Anna, 'Ah, yes, thank you.' And here Anna turned and noticed that Baras was watching them from afar. Here we will go back to the events when Baras decided to go after them and started saying to himself, 'Where are you now? You haven't left the castle gates yet, have you?' And here his assistant said, 'Your Majesty? In such a hurry?' But Baras didn't answer him and was saying to himself, 'Why does it seem like she's trying to run away from me?' And he opened the castle door, saying to himself, 'I want to grab her now and throw her in the bedroom.' At the same time, Selene and Anna arrived at the gate, and here Selene said happily, 'The weather is nice.' Baras had reached them but realized, saying to himself, 'Okay, Selene is an ordinary person with no sense of humor. There is no way to escape Anna's eyes, which have risen to the rank of royal knight of the empire.' So in tension, he said to himself, 'Why was I in such a hurry?' And then Anna noticed him and Baras gestured for her to go and not look at him, saying to himself, 'Okay, at this distance I can get there in no time if something happens, so it should be fine.' But Anna looked at him angrily and then continued on her way with Selene and Baras behind them. He looked at them and said to himself, 'If I see her trying to escape, I will catch her and tie her up.' And here we return to the present, where Selene is sitting by the fountain, and he looks at her and says to himself, 'I just need a good reason, so this is a good opportunity.' Ah, maybe there are other reasons to find fault with her. But they remained sitting by the fountain doing nothing. And here Baras got bored and said to himself, 'Anyway, didn't you get tired of just sitting there? If you're just going to keep sitting, what's the point of going out? Hey, are you trying to check your escape routine in advance? Am I supposed to just go back?' And here the assistant said, 'Imagine, he must have done all the work.' But the truth is, he felt a little sorry for him. And here some people noticed him and found out who he was. and one of them bowed and said, "Hello, Your Majesty." Baras looked at the person's trembling hand and then looked away, saying to himself, "I can clearly see what you're thinking. The assassin who is said to be worse than the devil is your king. Although you feel safe, you will feel scared when you see me standing right in front of you. Whatever the case, the important thing now is not to lose Selene, no matter what happens." And here, when Selene laughed, he smiled too. And here the scene changes after Selene's return, and she took a bath, saying happily, "Ah, the refreshment. Now is the time for dinner." And here, when there was a knock on her door, she said in relief, "Come in." And she was shocked to find Baras standing in front of her, and felt embarrassed and covered herself up, saying, "What?" Baras was also shocked, and took her out and closed the door in his face. And here he lowered his head and said to himself, "I thought the time had passed for bathing, eating, and resting." He said this because he had already bathed and eaten. I even brought a gift and said to myself, maybe she doesn't love me already, but she'll hate me even more now. And here Anna arrived and said to him, "Your Majesty." And in surprise she said, "What's going on?" At the same time, Selene was sitting on the floor, saying to herself, "I'm losing my mind. Of course I thought it was Anna. It's not like me now, but I'm trying to prevent it from happening." And here she imagined Baras saying to her, "Ha, you're locked up." And she collapsed, saying to herself, "What if he said this? Please give me another chance. Please." Baras was already behind her, and here she was surprised that he covered her up. He said, "You'll cool down." Here, Selene felt embarrassed and said to herself, "Thank you for being kind to me." Here, Baras was stunned and said to himself, "She said, kind? Am I really kind? I think it's good that people see me differently." Then shyly he said to her, "Well, I didn't do anything big." Then he turned his head to the side and said, "I'll wait outside. Please call me when you're changed. We'll have dinner together." Here she looked at him shyly and said to herself, "Together?" And they did. Here she started to say to herself, "This is the first time we've eaten together in the original story. There's no scene like this. Maybe, does he expect me to make a mistake?" At the time, Baras was looking at her in anger. Here, when she looked at him and smiled, his heart skipped a beat, and he felt embarrassed. The angry expression on his face suddenly changed. And then he said, his hand trembling, "By God, this woman, no one has ever done that before. How can she touch my body in such an informal way? Is she deliberately ignoring my tough appearance?" Here, he took the gift to give it to her, saying to himself, "It seems like I'm the only one who feels strange and regretful." Here, when Selene took it, she looked at it in amazement and said to herself, "What is this? Can I open it?" And Baras said to her, "It's a gift. Open it." When Selene opened it, she was stunned by its beauty. Then she said to him, "This is for me and Baras, of course." Here Selene fell silent, feeling shy. She was saying to herself, "I know Baras might not care, but this is the first gift I've ever received from a man. He's actually trying to be nice to me." Then she said happily, "So many things have changed from the original story. Maybe I can get along with him well now. I have hope." Baras was looking at her silently, saying to himself, "Now I have no doubt the problem has already been solved." He imagined her saying to herself, "I'll take this to a jewelry store or a pawn shop and sell it for at least 1,000 gold pieces, or I'll take it to the castle and demand generous compensation. Even though if she's caught trying to sell it, she'll have to run away, but it won't be easy for her to escape." Then he grabbed her, and all he had to do was treat her as a thing, just as he had decided at the beginning. Then he said angrily, "Yes, I just have to catch her, and then she will cry every day while she was happy and saying to herself, 'This is the first gift I've ever received.'" The next day, Selene returned and went out with Anna. He was watching them from the window, then smiled and said to himself, "Okay, everything is going according to plan. I also covered the Grand Duchess's local debt. I already told Anna about it, so all I have to do is wait for the right moment. He took his robe and said to himself, I just have to wait. The assistant watched him in silence and said to himself, at the age of 9, the Grand Duke entered the body of a war orphan and entered the enemy camp. After 2 years there, his body grew stronger, and he returned with the enemy's head. After he recovered, he returned to war when he was 13 years old. Since then, I have never seen my master look like this. He fell silent in tension and looked at him from the window, crying and saying to himself, I am happy that spring has come to you, my master. I will cheer for you, and... The scene changes, and he looks at Celine standing at a fruit vendor. He says to himself, what is that woman doing for the sake of hell's creator? The only thing she has bought so far is 2 apples, grilled chicken drumsticks, and a rough-looking leather wallet. He boiled with anger and said, it seems that she has no intention of running away. When they noticed his presence, they said to each other, it is really the Grand Duke. But Baras didn't hear them, as he said angrily to himself, when will her true intentions show up? Then he looked at her and said, is it now? But he was shocked when she took a small bag and said to herself, that's it? What can she do with a small bag? When she left with Anna, he kept looking at them and said to himself, she should buy something strong that can carry a lot of weight. When Celine stopped at a shoe vendor, he looked at her as she thought and looked at the shoes and said, you need a strong shoe with a low heel that you can run long distances in. But Celine left, followed by Anna, without buying any shoes. So Baras was furious and said, how can such a frustrating woman exist? When he found her sitting by the fountain feeding Anna, he said, why the hell did you go out and buy those things? Why didn't you leave as soon as you had the chance? Why? And here she shared the food with Anna, smiling and happy. So Baras said in astonishment, how can someone smile so happily like that? I certainly didn't take my eyes off her for a moment, and I don't even have an idea why she's smiling. What's making her laugh? I have no idea. And here Celine was smiling and saying to herself, the chicken skewers are so delicious. Then she ate the rest of them and said to herself, I still have a lot of money left and the weather is nice. But when suddenly a wind came, she said, oh, it's cold. And here she remembered when Baras covered her up, she said, that feeling yesterday was really warm. And when she took his arm, she could see that he was very strong, so much so that it wouldn't matter if her whole heavy body fell on him. And every time I remember that, I smile in this world. Baras's loneliness was predetermined, but I was lonely too, and all my days were like that. Maybe we met and became a couple for a reason, and somehow I feel like we can agree. No, I really wish we could agree.